For very good reason, mental health and brain health is receiving significant attention on multiple fronts right now. But what about nutrition? Do the things we put in our mouth have any impact on brain health and mental health? Welcome to the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brad Cooper, co-founder of the Catalyst Coaching Institute, and today you're going to hear from one of the world's leading experts on the subject of nutritional psychiatry, Professor Felice Jacka out of Australia. She has pioneered research examining how our diet and gut health influence our mental and brain health, and her recent book is titled Brain Changer, and it very well might be the game changer you've been looking for. She did mention during the interview that she was having some work done on her roof, and you will occasionally hear a little buzzing sound in the background, but it's very minor, and she was such an incredible guest. It is well worth the occasional buzz. On the coaching front, there are a couple of spots left for our June 25th kickoff of the next NBHWC approved coaching certification. And if you're already a coach and you have not yet registered for the big event this September, the Rocky Mountain Coaching Retreat and Symposium in Estes Park, Colorado, we are getting closer to the cap and the block of rooms is just about gone. So please do not wait for this if you're planning to join us. All the details for both are available at catalystcoachinginstitute.com, or feel free to reach out to us anytime. We'll get a call lined up, results@catalystcoachinginstitute.com. Now, let's cook up some answers with Professor Felice Jacka on the latest episode of the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast. Professor Jacka, it is a pleasure to have you join us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So let's jump right in. The intersection between nutrition and mental health and brain health, that is such a critical topic at such a critical time, obviously. How'd you get started on this? Where did this journey begin?
Well, we know that, and this has been the case for quite a while now, that unhealthy diet or poor diet is the leading cause of illness and early death now around the globe. And this is because of these massive changes to our food environment, which means that people across the world are eating very, very differently to how they used to eat. Many, many more of these ultra-processed food products and a great deal less of the fruits and vegetables, whole grain cereals, nuts and seeds, all of those foods that we know are critical to support our health. And so I've always been quite passionate about food. And when I came into psychiatry research, I was really intrigued to note that the evidence base for nutrition as a fundamental component of good mental health, that evidence wasn't there. The research hadn't been done, which was very different to what you see in, say, heart disease or diabetes or what have you. And around this time, so this is in the early 2000s, there were a lot of very, very interesting studies coming out of the States in particular in the field of neuroscience, showing a direct impact of diet on this key region of the brain called the hippocampus, which is the one part of the brain that puts on new neurons over life. This part of the brain grows and shrinks, and it's critical to our ability to learn and remember things, and also to our mental health. And these animal studies were showing that, if you manipulate diets, you manipulate the size and the function of the hippocampus. And around the same time was this understanding, this field called psychoneuroimmunology, which was showing just how important the immune system was to mental health. And so what this new field was telling us was that mental health and mental illness, they don't just exist in the brain. These things are whole body disorders, of course. We are not just a brain and a body separated. We are one very complex integrated system. And nutrition, of course, influences these key things that we know are important to good mental health, or that we were learning were important for good mental health. So I became really intrigued and wanted to actually test the hypothesis that the quality of our diets mattered to our mental health. So I did this for my PhD, and it was the first study to do this, and it ended up on the front cover of the American Journal of Psychiatry, so It had a big impact. And on the basis of that, I was able to go on and do a lot more research in many different countries and critically in many different age groups. So right from the start of life. So, for example, we looked at the quality of mothers' diets during pregnancy and the children's diets in the first few years of life. And we looked at that in relation to their emotional health and regulation over the first few years of life. We did this in more than 23,000 mothers and their children.
Wow.
And we showed this link between diet quality and children's emotional health. We saw this in adolescents again and again and again, independent of these key factors like family, economic status and education and family conflict and these sorts of things. Young people's diets were really very closely linked to their mental health. And because we know that half of all mental disorders start by the age of 14, this was really, really important understanding, because unlike many other risk factors for mental health problems, diet is something that you can change. It's something you can modify. So we're thinking here about prevention. And then we saw right at the other end of life that this was also true. As people age, their risk for depression, where maybe they've never had it before, often increases. And we saw that people's diets and the quality of their diet was linked to whether or not they developed depression as they aged. And then at the same time, we also generated the first human data to show this link between diet quality and the hippocampus, the same as what we'd seen in the animal studies, but in humans. And that's now also been replicated. And then, of course, you know, we ran the first randomized control trial to show that if you take people with clinical depression, moderate to severe clinical depression, and you help them to improve their diet, it has a major impact on their depressive symptoms, and that it's both affordable to do this and very cost effective. You get big cost savings. So that trial, the SMILES trial, has been very well known and very impactful. So we now have a very well developed and consistent evidence base across countries, cultures, age groups for the quality of our diet being linked to our risk for these common mental health problems. And we also have some emerging data about how this might be working. And now we're very interested in the gut and the role of the gut in this link. And then we also now have this clinical evidence, and that's building. There are more and more studies now showing the same thing. So across the board, we're now starting to really get that the same as with heart disease or diabetes or what have you, what we eat every day is germane to our mental and brain health, not just to our physical health.
So with the SMILES trial, can you expand on the significance of that? If you compared it to, they've done similar studies with exercise, they've done similar studies, obviously the medication baseline. How did it compare to something like medication, the nutritional changes?
It was a much larger effect size.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah, much larger.
Fantastic.
However, the caveat is, of course, that whilst you can blind a pill trial,
sure,
so people don't know if they're getting the active medication or the placebo, and what we see often in depression trials is this very large placebo response. You can't do that with diet. People know what they're getting,
sure,
you know, and so expectation bias can play a role in that. But what we saw that was very encouraging was that, and this has been the case in other studies since then that have shown the same thing, is the degree of dietary change was very closely linked to the degree of depression improvement. In other words, the more people improved their diet, the better off their mental health was. So that tells us that there's something really important there. And we also did these economic evaluations, and we showed that there was an average in our study of about $3,000 per participant cost saving. And that was because people were seeing other health professionals less often and losing less time out of role. So this is saying it's not just benefiting people's mental health, but also their functioning and their physical health as well, which makes sense.
Wow.
So in our SMILES trial, we randomly assigned people with moderate to severe clinical depression to receive either 3 months of dietary support from a clinical dietitian or 3 months of what we call social support, which we know is helpful for people with depression. And we saw that people could improve their diet and that the benefits were, again, independent of any weight change. And this is an important point because of all the studies we've done, they all show that the link between diet and mental health is quite independent of body weight. So body weight's important. If you eat a unhealthy diet, you're more likely to be carrying extra body weight. And that is in turn linked to poor mental health outcomes, possibly through the immune system and various other biological systems. But quite independently of that, what you eat matters to your mental and brain health, regardless of what size your body is. And I think that's a really powerful message as well.
That's fantastic. All right. So I want to talk brain health and mental health separately here. Let's start with the brain health. Top tips on this front. If someone just wanted the quick version, the synopsis of what people can do to enhance their brain health, not going all the way to mental health, what tips would you throw out there?
They're the same tips.
That was my follow-up question. Excellent.
They are for
Okay.
physical health. So the existing evidence is that traditional diets of all types, whether they're Norwegian or Japanese or Chinese or Australian or Mediterranean, they all are associated with better health. And so the key message here is it's increasing the quantity and the diversity of your plant food intake. So that's vegetables, fruits, legumes, very important, we think, because of their fiber content. So that's your chickpeas, lentils, beans, etc. Nuts and seeds, and of course the whole grain cereals. And very important, reducing or eliminating the intake of these ultra processed foods. So foods with long lists of ingredients, things that come in packets that are not really food, they're frankenfoods, right, or food products. So they are full of the added sugars, the added salts, the emulsifiers, the artificial sugars, all of which we know have a negative impact on the gut and its resident bacteria, which we think is a key pathway by which what we eat influences our mental and brain health, as well as our physical health, of course.
Very good. And that makes it easy for folks. They're not like, oh, wait, no, do I want mental health or brain health? No, it's the same stuff here. All right. So as you've done this research, what are some of the big surprises? What are the things that you came out of it saying, well, I didn't think I'd find that?
I think firstly is how consistent these findings are. Almost invariably in every single population we've looked in, we've seen these links. And that's important to understand, of course, that it's the same for people all over the world, whatever age range you're in. Diet matters to your mental health, particularly in regards to depression and anxiety, which is where most of the data are so far. Second, that the details are not that important. You know, some people will eat red meat, others won't. Some people will, have lots and lots of fermented foods, others won't, depending on their cultural background. That doesn't seem to be important. The details are not important. The important stuff is that you're eating a whole foods diet with lots of plant foods, lots of diversity, hopefully good quality sources of protein, so not processed meats like salamis and hams and things, but good quality sources of protein, and very importantly, avoiding those ultra-processed frankenfoods because they're the real problem. And so that's the other thing. And I guess that's really key is that you don't have to get hung up on the details. Yeah. You don't have to go and have organic berries from the hills tops of Peru. It's the basics, that will hold you in good stead, and then you just build on that. And this is very importantly, it's not, you don't do this instead of other forms of treatment. You do this as the foundation, and then if you need other forms of treatment, you do that as well.
So well said. In so many different ways. The simplicity is such a draw. I think people, we had a guest a couple months ago and really good information, but it was just so overwhelming that I can't imagine anyone getting past XYZ page and not feeling like I can't do it. And you're saying, wait, that's fine if you want to follow that, but the details, the devil's not in the details. The devil's in stay with the basics, high quality. And I love your term frankenfoods.
Some other things that I think are really important that are germane to that, but also were surprising findings from a decade now of detailed research into this. Supplements, chuck them away. Absolutely, really, except in there's some cases with people with quite severe major depressive disorder where a folate supplement might be useful in addition to what they're already having. A good quality fish oil supplement may be helpful in addition to what they're doing. But in most cases, the supplements, the evidence for them is just not really there.
Right.
And secondly, going back to what I said before, and I think this is so important, body weight is not the issue. And I think so much of the messaging around food has been directed at body weight and the obesity epidemic. Yes, obesity is a major health issue. It's a huge health issue, and it's arisen because of these major changes to our food systems and our industrialized food complexes. It's relates to the increasing availability and palatability of these Franken foods. They are everywhere. They're heavily promoted. They're really cheap. And they are designed to interact with the reward systems in the brain so that we want more and more of them and we overeat them. That is key. The other thing is antibiotics. Antibiotics have been used throughout the food system, throughout, chicken and cattle, et cetera, et cetera. They are given mainly to make those animals put on weight. And we have been consuming them in large quantities through the food system for decades. And that, of course, is correlated closely with this massive obesity epidemic. But over and above that, because we know that for most people, even if they take weight off, it will come back on. Losing weight is very, very difficult. Forget about that. Concentrate on increasing the quality of your diet and feeding your gut bacteria, and you will get all of these benefits, even if your body weight doesn't change.
Good. Very, very well said. All right. So I love your emphasis on the evidence. One of our goals here on this podcast, as I said in the introductory email to you, is we want to throw the headlines off to the side. We want to crush the fads as much as we can, because there's so many of those in our industry, and really dive into the evidence. What are some, just to have some fun with this, what are some of the headlines and fads that you hear them, you see them, and you just shake your head like, oh my word, are you kidding me? Based on what you know. So we won't spend 3 hours on this, just have some fun with it.
Honestly, there's just such a vested interest in so many people in selling their supplements, their diet plans, their books, etc. They often are MDs, then they use that MD qualification because how is someone in the general population supposed to know that someone with an MD is not the expert on these things and shouldn't actually be promoting non-evidence-based information. And I feel really strongly about this. For me, I think there's an ethical imperative here as a clinician to only be promoting something that has a good evidence base. The Paleolithic diet, oh my goodness, the ketogenic diet. I mean, the ketogenic diet, very serious, strict medical diet that we know has benefits in epilepsy. This is where the evidence is. We see in the randomized controlled trials that exist in humans that they can have severe and serious medical consequences, even for young, healthy people. We are running a pilot study on the ketogenic diet, a healthy version of the ketogenic diet in a population with psychosis. But at this stage, the human evidence is just not there, and yet it is being heavily promoted. Now, it may be that in some psychiatric populations, such as those with psychosis, it may be beneficial. That's a very big difference to saying for everybody they should be going on a ketogenic diet. And again, this is mainly driven by a desire for weight loss. And I get it that if you are living surrounded by the SAD, which is this standard American diet, which is full of Franken foods, that's something that breaks that addiction to those high sugar processed foods is really powerful, because it helps you to turn your back on those and just go eat something else. It doesn't mean it's the good thing to be doing based on the evidence. So until we have actual human data that tells us that this is a safe and effective way to go about improving anything, seriously, just don't do it. Do what the evidence tells us, which is absolutely overwhelmingly in favor of that Mediterranean-style diet, diets that are high in plant foods, diversity, and low in ultra-processed foods.
Very good. Very good. Any others that make you, and they don't have to be diet specific, but anything that you're seeing out there and that conflicts with your research?
I mean, gluten-free. This idea, this gluten sensitivity and everything else. What we know is that the diversity and the health of our gut microbiota has massively diminished over decades as our sources of food have become more and more refined and also monotonous, if you like, and we've lacked diversity and we don't have anywhere near enough fiber to feed our guts. We've blasted our guts with antibiotics. Our gut microbiome in the West, very often sad. And this then makes it very difficult to happily digest the foods that we know are the most critical substrates for the gut microbiota to do what they do. And these are the foods that are high in FODMAPs. They're the whole grain cereals, and they're the onions and things like that. So people often have very grumbly guts because their diets are terrible, their microbiota are really, really sad, and they think that the answer to that then is removing those foods that your bacteria need to actually thrive. Now, in the short term, you'll get a reduction in symptoms when you do that, but you will also have a detrimental impact on your gut. So as one of my students said so beautifully, the answer to a problem with beans is actually more beans, but you do it gradually, and you increase. You don't take gluten out of your diet. That non-gluten, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, it's not actually a thing. It's not supported by the research evidence. People are reacting to the high complex carbohydrates in grains because their guts are just not up to managing it. So what you do is, hopefully with the help of a dietitian, take the FODMAPs out of your diet, you go on a low FODMAP diet for a while, and then you gradually reintroduce them with a focus on improving the health of your gut. So that means including fermented foods, including probiotics, doing things that gradually over time can improve the health of your gut microbiome. But this issue of non-diverse, unhealthy guts, and that which then flows on to a detrimental impact of every bit of our health and functioning, is a major issue, and how we address that is unclear in many cases. So just for an example, in cancer therapy, we see that in cancer we've had this major revolution in recent years with the application of immunotherapy, first in melanomas, and now they're being trialled more widely in different types of cancers. And this is a very different way of treating cancer from what we've had before, which has been chemotherapy and, radiotherapy. Now, only about 20 to 40% of people will respond to immunotherapy. But if they do respond, it's very powerful. You often get people who are having, complete miraculous remission of cancer where they've really been at death's door. So we want to know, why is it that some people respond really well and other people don't? It seems to be about the gut. So these are not just animal studies. These are large human cohort studies showing that people who respond to immunotherapy have a healthier gut microbiome. What does that look like? It's a diverse microbiome. It's a microbiome that has these what we call probiotic bacteria, the bifidobacteria, the lactobacillus, the akkermansia. These are the bacteria that we know are living in the guts of people who have a diet that's high in a diverse range of plant foods and healthy foods, and who don't consume those frankenfoods. And because so many people have such an unhealthy microbiome, what they're actually doing, and there's 2 trials underway at the moment, is they're taking poo from the people who have responded to the immunotherapy, and they're doing a poo transplant into the people who haven't responded. Interesting. Yeah, and we think that fecal transplants in the first instance, until we get to the guts, if you like, of what makes a healthy microbiome, and this is a very, very complex thing, as you can imagine, but the poo transplants seem to be holding promise. And the initial results from some of those studies presented at a poster at a big cancer conference are that people had seen shrinkage in their tumours and some outcomes that looked to be pointing in the right direction. There's another cancer trial where they're taking people who are at high risk of colon cancer or who have already had colon cancer, and they're getting them to eat beans every day. They're saying, here you go, have half a tin of navy beans a day. That's all we're doing, is just that addition to your diet, because we know that beans are just some of the most potent food for your gut bacteria.
Oh, is that right?
And fiber, yeah. So if you think about the gut bacteria, we have trillions of bacteria that live all on us and in us. And up until, a couple of decades ago, we thought bacteria were bad. We were focused on the pathogenic bacteria, the ones that can make us sick. We now understand that we have co-evolved with these commensal bacteria. We can't live without them. They can't live without us. They're all over our bodies in all our nooks and crannies, and they play a very, very important role in our health. The largest reservoir of our bacteria are in our gut. And what they primarily do is break down the components of food that we can't break down ourselves. And that's fiber and polyphenols, which used to be called antioxidants. They're from plant foods. And we in the West, of course, don't have anywhere near enough of these. We don't have anywhere near enough of the dietary fiber. Now, when the bacteria break down these dietary fibers and polyphenols, and this is very, very complex, but this is what we know thus far, they break it down through a process of fermentation. And that process of fermentation produces many, many, many metabolites. Some of these are neurotransmitters, some of them are vitamins, and some of them, many of them are what we call short-chain fatty acids. These interact with every single cell in the body. They help to affect what genes get turned on and off. They seem to have a very important role in affecting our body weight, in our blood glucose and insulin, in our immune system. Something like 70% of our immune functioning is actually a function of what happens in the gut and the health of our gut. And increasingly, we understand that they also influence our mental and our brain health. And this is relevant to, obviously, mental disorders, but also Alzheimer's disease and dementia and how we age. So if you don't feed your gut that basic substrate that it needs, which is fiber and polyphenols, it can't do these things. And in the West, we don't eat anywhere near enough of the fibers and the polyphenols that we need for our guts to do the thing. And then we also blast them with antibiotics. And we sanitize the hell out of everything. And so our microbiome has become this sad, flaccid, limp little lettuce leaf instead of the big flourishing rainforest that it should be. And that has huge implications for our health, our longevity, that of the next generation, and indeed actually the survival of the human race. And it means that we're incredibly prone to new viruses that come along and knock us off our perch because our microbiome and thus our immune system are just not able to deal with it. And so you're seeing in relation to COVID, of course, much higher death rates in people who have comorbid chronic diseases that are linked to poor lifestyle behaviours. Now, that doesn't mean we should be blaming those individuals for eating badly. What it means is that we've allowed our food environment to be so toxic that people who don't have access to means or to knowledge are consuming these frankenfoods that are destroying their health, destroying their gut microbiota, making them very unwell. And then when a virus comes along, they got nothing.
No chance. Yeah.
They got no chance. And so this is an issue of poverty. It's an issue of the food system and a lack of food policy. And when you understand that something like 70 of the top 100 biggest companies in the world produce these frankenfoods and derive untold billions of dollars from doing so. And here we're talking about Unilever and Nestle and Coca-Cola and these huge multinational organizations. They now account for changing our food systems around the globe such that poor diet is now the leading cause of illness and early death across the globe. And they do so in a way that is completely unmitigated. There are virtually no policies at the government level anywhere to restrain them and to limit what they're doing. And so now frankenfoods are, as I said, the most widely available, the most heavily marketed, the most palatable, the cheapest of the food options. And because they're designed to interact with the reward systems in our brain, we are not equipped to say no to them when they are everywhere we go. It's like being a junkie and having a crack den on every corner and being expected to just walk past them. That's not how our brains work. So the failure of food policy around the globe, the failure of governments to address the activities of these large industrialized food companies that are destroying the health of the population, but also the planet at the same time, without anything standing in their way, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. It does my head in. It's so short-sighted. I mean, humans are very short-sighted. That's why we're charging towards, the end of the human race via climate change without doing anything about it. But because the obesity epidemic, which is the marker of these changes in the food system, has happened over many decades rather than straight away. People don't see it as the emergency that it is. They respond strongly to an acute emergency like COVID, but they don't recognise that this huge emergency of what's happening to population health is actually, it's massive and far bigger than COVID. Similarly, antibiotic resistance and the fact that we will very soon find ourselves in a situation, unless we come up with some very, very clever solutions, where we no longer have access to antibiotics and that where people will die from minor scratches. That's not being talked about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the human race is really at a precipice, but it just drives me mad that these companies are allowed to make trillions of dollars worth of profit at the expense of global health and the environment without anything standing in their way.
Let me take us down a little different path here, and it's not really a fair question because you've talked about the variety is a big key to this, but could you give us just a sample day? I know there's no such thing as a perfect day of eating, but just as people are listening, they're like, ooh, maybe I could do more beans, but where would I put that? Like, could you just walk through a good day, not the good day?
Well, there's very simple things. So if you're starting from a pretty not so great base, your standard American diet. So there's what I might eat, someone who's a nutrition professional who's always eaten a pretty healthy diet. So what I would start the day with is probably oats, and these would be not processed oats, but unprocessed oats that I've maybe soaked overnight or just, cook on the stove, but porridge. And I would put in some crushed almonds. I'd just get some almonds and a mortar and pestle and pop them in for that the protein and the fibre and the really important fatty acids, and a bit of soy milk because I like, and again, this is not the highly processed soy milk. This is made with whole beans. Or I would have a piece of sourdough rye toast with some sardines, really great source of good long-chain fatty acids. Or I would have some black rice. I really love black rice, full of polyphenols, full of resistant starch to feed your gut bugs with, some frozen berries and some nuts, something like that. But from people who, making a transition from, say, Cheerios or some sort of really highly processed breakfast food, you would maybe go towards eggs and baked beans on a piece of toast. That would be a good transition to start with. And then you would hopefully add in maybe some more veggies over time. Breakfast veggies, I like to cook up tomatoes and zucchini and spinach and mushrooms, things that cook very quickly, that have a high water base, with an egg and breakfast mush, I call it in my book. And lunch, again, you might have, if you're moving from lunch that might have been a white bread Subway type roll, you might move then just gradually to have a less refined bread and more salad in that bread roll, and maybe have some tinned tuna, rather than have a schnitzel or something like that. For me, I would have lots and lots of lettuce leaves. I would put in some pre-cooked black rice. I would put in some crushed nuts. I would put in some tinned lentils, probably. So tinned lentils and tinned chickpeas are a brilliant way to just add fibre really easily. You can just tip them into salads. You can put them into your spag bowl if you're making spag bowl. You can put them in all sorts of things. On the weekends, I get out the crock pot, the slow cooker,
sure,
which you can get almost anywhere for almost nothing. And I just put in veggies. I put in barley, which is a fantastic chewy whole grain. I'd put in beans. And you could, if you were eating meat, put in, a lamb hock or something like that, tomatoes, some herbs, put it on the slow cooker, and there you've got stew for the week. So those sorts of things where you are just making those basic swaps. And then, of course, your sweets, rather than having your highly processed foods, which have got the emulsifiers and the sugars and artificial sugars, etc., a good quality Greek yogurt with some frozen berries on top and some honey. That's a great one. A few pieces of really dark chocolate. That's another good one. Dates. There's lots of things that you can do for the sweet tooth as well.
Okay. Very good. Very good. Thank you. Okay, let's go with this one. If you were to identify 3 non-negotiables, and you may have covered your non-negotiables already, but if you're going to identify 3 non-negotiables in terms of brain health, mental health, what would be the 3 that you would say absolutely? And again, as I'm asking that, I'm thinking, I think you've identified multiple. What would be your big 3?
Look, I think obviously upping your intake of fruits and vegetables, particularly vegetables, and the diversity, and that would include particularly your leafy greens. I think they'd be a non-negotiable. So this, I like spinach and kale and silver beet and watercress and parsley and lots of things that I just grow in the garden. Second would be legumes. I think it's very hard for you to hit your fibre goals without legumes. So lentils, chickpeas, beans, soybeans, so edamame beans or tofu or even baked beans. You have baked beans on toast. These are all beans and they are all really potent forms of fibre. That would be number 2. And number 3 would be do not eat the frankenfood.
I knew that one was coming. All right. Very good.
And that includes the, in inverted commas, healthy frankenfoods, the protein bars and these highly processed so-called health foods. They're not foods. They're frankenfoods. That's good to clarify. Absolutely. All right. Is it ever too late? If someone's been following the wrong habits in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, is it like, you know what? What am I going to do at this point? Or does it change? No, it's never too late. And what we know is that you can affect change in your gut microbiota within hours by changing your diet to get the really sustained benefits where you start to get back in that microbial diversity after it's been lost because you haven't fed your bugs and you've lost them all. That can take a couple of years. So, but we see from the trials in humans that you can increase your diversity over time by making those switches and increasing the fibers and the bug food. So it might take 18 months or so, but you will get that benefit. But based on the research evidence so far, you will get benefits to your mental and brain health within a very short time frame, like within weeks, by making those switches to your diet. And you'll start to see improvements in your gut health even before then. There's a fantastic study of gut health where they looked at the gut microbiomes of African Americans living and eating a SAD, and then they looked at the gut microbiome of South Africans living a more traditional lifestyle in South Africa. So as been seen many times in these studies, the microbiome of the people living a more traditional lifestyle with a far higher intake of plant foods and a lower intake of animal proteins and fats, they had a much healthier microbiome. It was more diverse. It had many more of these short-chain fatty acid producers that we know are really important for health, and much lower levels of these markers of risk for colon cancer. And of course, the African Americans, they had the opposite. They had a horrible diet, their microbiome looked terrible, and they had high levels of these cancer risk markers. Then they swapped their diets for just 2 weeks. So the poor South Africans got the SAD, and then the African Americans got a much more healthful diet. And within 2 weeks, you saw this shift, so that the poor South Africans, their cancer risk markers went up and their gut microbiota went down.
2 weeks.
Within 2 weeks.
Wow.
Now, Tim Spector, who's a buddy of mine, he's a professor of genetic epidemiology over at King's College in London, and he's head up massive numbers of studies in large twin cohorts where they really start to delve into, okay, what's genetics, what's diet, et cetera, et cetera. And he's done lots of work. He's written 2 books. These last one's just been released called Diet Myths, and I recommend it. It's a goodie. His son, typical young man in his 20s, he elected as a little bit of an experiment for television to put himself on a junk food diet. And I think he did that for 10 days where he just ate nothing but SAD for 10 days. He, according to the book of his new book that I'm just reading, he had such a major impact on his gut microbiome within that 10 days, a major drop in diversity and markers of health. And it took him something like 18 months to get it back again.
Wow.
You can do a lot of damage very quickly. and it can take a long time to get better, but you can actually get it better. So if you've been living and eating a SAD for many years, all is not lost. You can still make those changes and get a benefit. It will just take time.
Perfect. All right. 2 more. I'm going to bring it back to you a little bit here on this next one. How are you applying your research in your own life differently than you were, let's say, a decade ago?
It's a really good question. I have just been through cancer, breast cancer, and very extensive treatment, which has been revolting. I recognise that whilst I understand about what a healthful diet looks like, I'm not always the best person at doing it because my work schedule is extremely intense, high levels of stress, a lot of travel and jet lag, which is very bad for the microbiome, too much alcohol, which many professionals use to de-stress at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
The red wine. All of those traps that you fall into, weight gain as a result, particularly when you hit menopause. So even though fundamentally I think my diet was pretty good, I still wasn't consistent enough with exercise. I still let myself, my body weight went up, and I was still really, really pushing the envelope with stress, overwork and travel. Now, between cancer and COVID, I am now not traveling. I'm getting lots of rest. I make sure that I exercise every day. For me, exercise is my medicine. Half an hour uphill walking on the treadmill.
Beautiful.
My heart rate up, my sweat pouring, and just being more careful about my food and my alcohol intake. That to me is my medicine to prevent cancer returning. So I'm just more mindful now, and I know a lot of researchers in my field who are similar, who understand the research evidence, but just the impact of our very intense work and pressure. We don't always do what we say we're going to do. I've got a great buddy who is a very well-known Alzheimer's disease researcher, and he was very, very overweight. He would sleep only a few hours a night. He would work ridiculous hours. He would eat the burger. And I remember talking with him at conferences, and he'd be saying, look, our data are telling us that a healthy diet and getting enough sleep and exercise is absolutely essential for averting dementia risk. And then he'd say, he'd be up there, hugely obese, sweating, saying, oh, but who can resist the burgers, hey?
Wow.
And then I didn't see him for a couple of years because he was on the other side of the country. And I ran into him in a conference, and he was like half the size that he was the last time I'd seen him. And I said, what happened? And he said, yeah, I had a heart attack.
Wow.
He goes,
got a wake up call.
A heart attack to pull you up short. And he goes, now I actually do what I practice what I preach.
Wow.
And I've changed my diet. I sleep, I exercise, all of those things. So there's a lot of personal experience when you have a health issue that really makes you start to pay more attention. But it's a bit sad that it has to come to that for humans to do that.
It is. And it's interesting because our audience is filled with people like you that are high performers and, type AAA. And even though most of us are very interested in health and wellness, it's just so easy to get off track when you're dialed in over here. And so that's a great example. Thanks for pulling the curtain back for us on that one. Last question. I don't know if you're ever on Twitter, but Twitter allows 140 characters, which is about 2 or 3 sentences. If you had a chance to tweet some message out, some life message, it doesn't have to be about nutrition, whatever you'd like to do here, and that the whole world would see your tweet tomorrow, what would you say? And we're not counting characters here, so don't worry about that. But just something short and to the point that this is your chance to get your message out to the world.
Oh, gee.
No pressure.
No pressure. I think, just what you put in your mouth matters to your mental and brain health.
Yeah.
If people could understand that, I think it's a much more powerful leverage point for behavior change. Because if you tell humans that if you eat unhealthy, and I put that in inverted commas, one day you might have a heart attack. Yeah. It doesn't mean anything.
It's so far out.
It's like climate change.
Right.
If you say what you eat today is going to affect the way you feel tomorrow, your ability to learn and remember and do your job and everything, that's powerful, and that you can make these changes pretty easily. And we've shown that you can do it in a way that's affordable, simple, and have a big impact on your health.
Beautiful.
But there's lots of things I'd like to say.
We'll get you the extended Twitter option there with all this stuff.
Well, the other thing I'd say is that our industrialized food industry, food system, is costing the globe in terms of health and the environment $12 trillion a year. Now, by 2050, that's expected to be 16 trillion, which is equivalent to the whole GDP of China every year. That's the cost of our industrial.
Yeah, but China's a really small country, so I don't know if that's really. So, Professor Jacka, best way for folks to follow you. This has been so good. I knew from our conversation, looking at some of the things you've done, that this would be really valuable, but this was really valuable. How can people follow what you're doing? What's the best way to keep track of you and your books and those kinds of things?
I mean, I am on Instagram, but I'm much less engaged with Instagram. But Twitter, I'm on Twitter.
Okay.
Our Food and Mood Centre. People look up at the Food and Mood Centre website. We've got huge amounts of information written in a way that's designed to be accessible to the general public. Really importantly, we have designed a free online course on nutritional psychiatry. It's very, aimed at the lay level. We're also doing ones for professionals, but this one's designed to be accessible to everyone. And since our first running of it less than a year ago, we've had close to 60,000 people from more than 160 countries enroll and go through that course. So that's a really great way. If people Google Food and Mood Future Learn, they'll find it very easily. And that is a great way to find out about nutritional psychiatry. You can also get my book I published last year, Brain Changer, which brings together all of the scientific knowledge that we have around nutritional psychiatry to date. And my new book that I've just written with my husband is a kid's book. It's called There's a Zoo in My Poo, and it's designed to give kids and their parents really basic, healthful information that allows them to make healthy food choices to feed their gut bacteria in a way that is fun.
Beautiful, beautiful. You can't forget that book name. That was a good one.
Yeah, it's a good one.
That's
great.
It
was fun. I wrote it with my husband. He did all the crazy drawings of the little bacteria. So it was a fun thing to do.
Very fun. Very fun. Well, thank you for figuring out time zones with me across the world. This was great having you. And let's definitely stay in touch. Stay up to date on what you're up to.
Yeah, good luck with everything. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.
Keep it simple and avoid the frankenfoods. We can remember that, can't we? 2 of a long list of great insights from Professor Felice Jacka. Very well done. Thanks to you for tuning in to the #1 podcast for health and wellness coaching. Next week's guest might just rock your literal world. It's Dr. Charles Mann, incredible writer and author of many best-selling books. We'll be focusing on his recent title, The Wizard and the Prophet, a book I stumbled upon that changed my worldview in so many ways. As always, if you have any questions about your career as a coach or integrating best-in-class coaching into your organization, if you're an employer, please reach out. Results@catalystcoachinginstitute.com. We'll get some time set up on the calendar for a call. Now it's time to be a catalyst. Let's turn the corner, shift gears, and step on the gas toward better than yesterday. This is Dr. Brad Cooper of the Catalyst Coaching Institute. Make it a great rest of your week, and I'll speak with you soon on the next episode of the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast, or maybe over at the YouTube coaching channel.